Hey everyone, James McBride here. Let's talk a little bit about certification tests, the certification tests that you're going to be taking. There's a science behind creating a test, and the majority of that science involves the wording of the actual question and then, of course, the answers that you're having to select from. Usually, when I have a student that's first introduced to these types of questions, they'll say, "Oh, that question is kind of vague because it could be this or that." And I'll politely tell them, "Well, actually, that's not true. There is one specific answer. You just don't understand the topic deep enough." That is usually the case. Now, I have used materials before, Cengage being one of them, that I'll read a question and I'm like, it could be this one or that one. That's a poorly worded question. But you're not going to see that on the certification exams. So let's describe the process of what you're going through when you take a test. They're going to take everything from you. They're going to take your wallet, your ID, they're going to take your phone, they're going to take everything from you. They're going to give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and you're going to sit down at a computer and they're going to log in. That's going to come up with your name. They're going to verify, yeah, that's you. Go ahead. And then they're going to hit start. And then that really takes you to the next screen where you then get to say, I'm starting the exam now. Once you do that, okay, here comes the questions. The questions are going to be long if you are getting them right. Almost every single certification test these days is done in a way to ask several concepts within one question. For instance, it might say something like, John is trying to figure out why a computer does not have internet access. They type ipconfig, it's a Windows machine. This is the response for ipconfig. What's the problem? And so really they're asking several things. Like that could be a DNS issue, that could be a DHCP issue, could be usually those two. But is this statically assigned or dynamically assigned? So they're really expecting you to look at that information, know what is this information providing me, and then look at the answers and say that's the answer because of this set of information that they're giving to me. So, in the process of this, you'll have usually four answers. You might have five, but if you have four, then you have one that's absolutely correct. And then you have one that's close to correct. Then you have one that's a little further away from being correct and one that's absolutely wrong. That's why in these tests, you'll notice that when you go and say, "Oh, what kind of percentage do I need to get to actually pass this test?" They'll go, "You need 750 points, or you need 840 points out of this many points." Because every single question has answers worth various points. The right answer may be worth 100 points. The next closest one may be worth 70 points. The one that's further away is worth 40 points, and the absolutely wrong one is 0 points. Unless it too had something in there about some topic, and then maybe it's worth 10 points. So you're building points, and yes, you're getting points for answers that are not quite correct. And that's why they don't do this thing where, oh, you got to get a 75 and 82 or whatever. You can figure that yourself, but they do this point value because every question is going to be a different point value depending on how hard the question is. Now, if there's five answers, then you're going to deal with two that are close, one that's correct, and then two that are wrong. This helps, but it only helps you if you know what the answers are predominantly. That's why I've said use study guides to really learn the information, not to memorize an answer. Some of it, of course, needs memorization, like STP, SMTP. What port is it? Sorry, STP. Yeah. SMTP, what port is it? Or what is POP3, which is a useless one that they have on there, but they'll have it on there. Or what is IMAP? Those things, yeah, you memorize what those port numbers are, but something again, how they're wording the question, the example I gave you, what did I get? What was the output of the ipconfig command? Because that's going to tell me what the answer is. And so you can't really memorize that. You could do some little clues and put them in your head and not really understand the topic. But when you get to the test, that's going to be hard. That's going to be a really hard thing for you to try to deal with. You really need to understand this is what they are asking me, and I understand all these concepts that are below that. Then you're set to go. But you're going to run into those, right, where maybe something confuses you as you're going through this process. You're like, I don't get what they're saying here. And then that's when looking at the answers and saying, given the information, I believe this one is the most correct. And knowing that there is the one that is correct, and then there's one that's close to it, and then there's one's a little further, and then one that's totally wrong. So that you can look at it and go, that one's totally wrong. That's not the answer. Now I'm dealing with these three. That gives you much higher percentage on the odds. So knowing that helps you when you're trying to jog your memory, and it's just something that oh, geez, I didn't study that one enough. I didn't study that topic enough. Yeah, so that helps you. It really, really does. I've used it a ton. And some of you know this, right? Some of you already know that that's the way these tests are made, and you use that tactic. However, don't waste time on ones you are a little fuzzy on. Just mark them and move on. So your study material should have basically a test that's like, okay, we're going to simulate the real thing. On those tests, you'll have a little box, usually at the bottom, that says mark, and you just put an X in it. Usually it's an X, but you just click it and you mark it. The other thing that I can tell you that's infinitely important is when you go through and you read a question, if there's something in it that you're not understanding, then read the answers, mark the one you think it might be, and then click on the mark button and move on to the next question. Everybody's a little different, but they will give you, usually for 90 questions, they'll give you 2 hours. So they kind of expand it a little bit. So it's not 90 questions, 90 minutes. Usually it's 2 hours and and then 90 questions, or 60 questions, and then you have an hour and a half to do that. Now these are all adaptive, so I can't say, oh, well, you're going to get 60 questions. It adapts as you move through it, and so you may end up with less questions because you're answering really hard questions, and you're in that process. They're testing 4 or 5 things, so that's really 4 or 5 questions that you're answering, and so you get less. For anybody, you have a certain amount of time, a certain speed that you are reading at and comprehending things at. So for me, when I really knew information, and I was, I've got a wall back here of certifications. When I really knew, I prepped and I knew the information well, it was about 30 to 40 seconds per question that I would run through, usually about 30, unless it's really short. Then it might even be 20 or 25 seconds. So you go through it and it's 30 seconds. And I learned on one of my exams how detrimental it is to run through a question and then go, oh, geez, I don't know. I didn't cover this enough. I'm blanking this. I know it, but I'm blanking it because I'm worried, I'm stressed. Oh, let me read it again. Let me read it again. When you do that, you're basically stopping your flow, and it hurts you. So don't do it. So I learned off of a couple of questions on one of the tests, and I was really starting to stress out because I had gotten like 3 or 4 questions right in a row at the beginning. And I was like, what the heck? Did I study this? Oh my goodness, I'm going to bomb this thing. And when you spent money, that's not something that's nice. So I learned by the time I got to the third question, this is hurting me. This is making me doubt questions that I know the answer to. So I'm not gonna spend time on these. So blah, 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 blah. I think it's that one. Mark, go to the next. I'll review that when I get to the end. Once I did that, then I went through the whole rest of the test. And then, of course, at the end, you're like, review marked. It's got a little button there. And you review the ones you marked. That's why you don't mark everything. Some people really doubt themselves, just like they really doubt themselves. And they're like, they mark half the test. That's going to be hard for you to review at the end. You only mark the ones that you know. I just totally blanked, and I'll come back to this because I know the answer to that, or I don't know this at all. I'm going to have to use this process of one of these is totally wrong. Let's get rid of that. Now let's look at the others and have to use that process to get through that question. So don't break your method, your speed. You don't have to time yourself. You don't have to know what that is, but you know as you're going through these study guides, and you know that as you go through the study guide, whether or not you're just answering that question because you've memorized it, which is not good, or whether or not you know it. I know that information and that's the answer. That's what you really want. So don't slow yourself down and get bogged down on a question because it'll mess up the next question. It'll make you doubt yourself. Mark it and move on. And then, of course, realize what are they doing when they ask me this? If I get a really long question, it's going to be more difficult, and I want to get that right because I'll normally get less questions. But what are they asking here? And of course, that digs into the information, right? That's do you understand the information? And then, of course, as you look at those questions, no, one of these is totally wrong. Just absolutely wrong. And sometimes it's best to read down through the questions and go, well, that's not right. That way you just, I'm not even considering that. Let's look at the other ones. Always look, this is my last piece of advice, always look at all the answers. Read the answers slow enough. Do not get to the point where you're like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's the one right there. Boom. B is the answer. And you didn't look at the rest of the answers or options for answers. Because remember, you may have picked one that's partially right and not totally right. And they have, that's another thing I haven't mentioned. Within that sentence up here that they're saying this is happening, and what's the answer? There may be a couple of things. And when you saw, answer B, and you said, oh, that's the answer, that actually only answered part of that question. And so make sure you read all of the answers, that you slow yourself down on that. I know a lot of people are getting prepped to take their exams. I'm proud of you. You will do great. I promise you, if you take the time to really study and put in that effort, you're going to pass that test and you're going to become certified. Now, some of you didn't get the academic pricing, so I don't know if you watched that video where I tell you this is how you get the academic pricing. But hey, you're scheduled, and that is fantastic. So I'm excited to see how this goes. There's lots of stuff about taking tests out there on the internet, but don't get too bogged down in that. Basically, I've covered the primary core of what you need to worry about. There is a stress level, right? Because you did pay for that test, and that raises the stress level. So you should, as you get closer to that date, that stress level should go up. And correspondingly, you should be prepping more. If you find yourself pulling back, I'm getting more stressed and I'm avoiding studying, that's a good sign that you're going to fail that exam and that you probably should put off that exam. Or better yet, realize I'm avoiding studying because this exam's coming up. That means I am not prepping well to do this. I'm just wanting it over, whatever the response or answer is going to be. And that's not where you want to be. You are fully capable of making this happen. You just need to put in the time and dig into what's behind that question so that you know why they're asking you that. Thanks so much for watching. I'm rooting for you. And if you have any questions, need any advice, please let me know.